Hello world, here we are in Helsinki today. There is coming a Paradigma conference soon, and today we have a very special guest here. He is Emeritus Professor from Iceland, Erlendur Haraldsson. And this is an interview about his life and his paranormal research and how this all has happened. So welcome to our interview program.
Thank you.
I assume that this is not your first visit in Finland.
This is my second visit. I visited Finland, Åbo and Helsinki sometimes in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some friend of mine in Åbo. He asked me to speak to his students, and he was interested in Sai Baba. Mm. But since then, I have not been to Finland.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You have been a researcher quite a long time. This voyage has been very impressive, I believe. So how all began that you are born in Reykjavik? Or
I'm born near Reykjavik in Iceland. And then I had my usual studies in the gymnasium. And then I went to the university and I studied philosophy. Philosophy was always a great interest to me. And I started to do that while I was in one winter in Edinburgh, and then I went to Freiburg. And there I heard one Professor Hans Bender. He was a very famous professor in Germany, Professor of Psychology, but he was also interested in the paranormal. He was interested in these experiences people can have or seem to happen that are not in line with our ordinary paradigm, an ordinary view of life. And he was very well read and very familiar with the field and gave a very impressive series of lectures on it. And then later I came to know him. And I also came to know more about the studies that had been done in this field. And there really my studies started in this area with him. And later I wrote a PhD with him and so on. So
if we're thinking about your background, if you still recall those things from childhood, was it your family also interested of those topics, or did they were religious or something else?
I really don't know too much about. Well, I think my father, he was more interested in the physical sciences and geology and then botany. I don't think he really believed much in these things. Mm-hmm. My mother may have done, but my sort of interest in this definitely doesn't originate with my family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. So your father was academic educated
No,
person?
He was not an academic, but he was a very learned man just by himself. Mm-hmm. He worked in a workshop, a tin workshop.
Oh.
Yes. And then he had a poultry farm, lots of hens.
Yeah, yes. Nice, very nice. Yeah. So basically, it was quite like an ordinary family.
Yes, it was an ordinary family, yes.
Okay, so this your story about those paranormal interests, they start with this Bender.
Yes.
So what was the first thing? Was it some lecture or how this happened, if you remember?
Well, I think I listened to a series of lectures that he had given, and then I became more aware what research has been done in this area. I may have read something about it, but not very little. And then also I had some, I was aware of Joseph Banks Rhine at Duke University and what he had done. And when I had finished my studies in Freiburg, I went to Durham, where J.B. Rhine was living, and he had established there an institute of parapsychology. And there I stayed for a year, and I became even more involved. And then after that, I went to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and that came really through someone I knew there, and then I came to know Professor Stevenson, who was a very learned man, and learned medical man, and had been a chairman of the Department of Psychiatry. But at this time, he was particularly interested in the study of children who insist they remember a past life. And he had at that time studied a great number of such cases. And then a little later, he asked me, when he had been doing this for some 20 years, and he was keen that some other people would also investigate it. So he asked me if I would be willing to study some number of cases. And I said, yes, I would be happy to do that. And I did that and studied a number of cases in Sri Lanka and then later in Lebanon.
In that time when you get into this paranormal issue, what was your background of studies and what was your graduation in that time? You was a student of psychology?
Yes, I was a student of psychology and already had finished my PhD in psychology. And so all my formal studies were over, and I was doing an internship in clinical psychology at the University of Virginia, where I came to know Stevenson. And Stevenson was also interested in mediumship. And I told him then about some interesting cases I knew about. One particular medium, Hafstein Björnsson. And so he was interested in that and gave me an opportunity to do some investigation of Hafstein Björnsson. We did some experiments with him. I was also able to attend all his sittings for 1 month and record all of them. So yes, so I gradually became more and more involved in this area. And then, as I think I told you earlier, when I finished my year at the University of Virginia, then Kalle Sosis, who was a scholar of the American Society for Psychical Research, he was just beginning or about to begin a study of deathbed visions, of visionary experiences that some people have near the time of dying. And he asked me to join him. And this study was planned first in the United States by interviewing doctors and nurses, and also in India, also by interviewing doctors and nurses. And we would first ask these doctors and nurses to describe their observations of the dying patients who they thought had some hallucinations or visions. And then when they had reported what they had observed, then we would ask a great number of persons, great number of questions. What was the content of these visions? Was it seen or heard or and so on? And who was the person who they had seen? Did they know about that? And who was the patient? What what drugs had these patients been getting. Did he suffer from a disease that might cause hallucinations? Was he having a high fever and so on? We sort of produced what we call the hallucinogenic index, namely, do we have reasons to believe that this is mostly these visions are mostly caused by hallucinatory effects. But we found that that was not the case. This happened also when there was no reason to believe in any hallucinatory effect.
In that time, when you starting to research those things with your colleagues, did you find some negative feedback from all other academic world? Did you have some kind of struggles with those?
Well, when I did this, I was not yet at the University of Iceland. Mm-hmm. I had been 1 year with Ryan in Durham, then 1 year with Stevenson at the University of Virginia, and then I came to New York and did this study. But I was not yet at the University of Iceland. Then I think it was 2 years later, a position was announced at the University of Iceland, was advertised, and I applied and I got the position. Mm-hmm. So that is how I started to work at the University of Iceland.
That time when you became interested of those paranormal things, how was in general in Iceland was it common things, and was it something that people could talk or couldn't talk?
Well, well, I had also questions about that. So the first thing I did, and the first major thing I did in Iceland, was to do an extensive survey of people's beliefs and experiences. We sent a questionnaire to some 1,100 people of a random sample for the whole country. And we asked about their experiences. Had they had an experience with someone who had died? Did they feel they had had a telepathic experience? Had they observed some unnatural movements like poltergeist, and so on and so forth? And lots of questions, and also questions about beliefs. So I came to know what the Icelandic nation really...
What kind of answers you got from
Well,
that?
I got the answer that about almost 2/3 of them reported that they had had some kind of a paranormal experience. Like about 31% felt they had had an experience of someone who had died in a waking state. So I became very knowledgeable about that, and when I had completed the study, I had a meeting with the press and told them about the findings, and they were very widely discussed in Iceland and became very well known. And then I wrote one book about it also, so people became aware of how things really stand in Iceland. Mm. And I wish you would do something similar in Finland.
Well, in that time you were becoming to the public in Iceland about those research what you have been doing, and you noticed that there was lots of people who has had those experiences. What was your next step? What did you with these results of?
Around that time, I continued to do my studies of children who remember past lives, like in Sri Lanka and Lebanon. And I also continued to do some further studies of Sai Baba by making many trips there to make further inquiries. So I became quite involved, but so in my spare time from my teaching, and yes, I also did some experiments in Iceland. For example, I did one interesting one, I think. We did that in secondary schools.
Mm-hmm.
We made a piece of paper with 40 empty cells. And then we asked those who took part to write in each cell 4 different symbols that they would expect a computer to select for the cells after the whole experiment was over. So I was really asking them to predict what signs would be put in these 40 cells.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked them, do you believe in something paranormal phenomena? Are you sure about it? You think it is likely? You don't really know, or you think it is unlikely, or you think you're sure about it, so it's not, doesn't exist. And 2 or 3 more questions. And then we asked the computer to get out all these symbols, 40, for each person.
Mm-hmm.
And they were put in an alphabetical order. So the computer printed out symbols for so and so many subjects, and there were, I don't remember, about 300, so that's a large number. And then we filled all this out, and when it has been filled out and checked, then we counted how many are correct. These were 40 cells, and there were 4 different symbols. So on the average, 10 should be right by chance. Yeah? And then when we looked at it as a whole, it was about 10. Yeah. No significant deviation. But if we looked at it, among those who are sure about paranormal phenomena, who do not know one way or another, are those who think they do not exist. Then you found differences. Those who think they truly exist, were a little above 0, 10 point something, 60, or I don't remember. And those who thought they do not exist, they had only 9 point something. They had less than they should have received by pure chance. Mm-hmm. And when we did the statistical test on the difference, then we found out there was a significant relationship between your beliefs and your predictive ability.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very fascinating.
Yeah, it was a major experiment, very cleanly done,
Mm-hmm.
and there really no angle to it to think that there was something wrong there, because we asked them to predict when the computer had not even done its work.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very well recorded, and it was checked and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the experiments I did.
Mm. Yeah. If we're talking about Icelanders, what you're also representing by your side, they seems to be quite open to those paranormal things, or how you would define it?
Well, they differ a lot. Some are open to it, but some are fiercely against it. Mm-hmm. And there were some, later at the university, there was some I got into an argument with some of my colleagues, mostly in physics and engineering, and we had a debate in the university newsletter about it. And I told them that this was just an empirical study, mm-hmm. like anything else, mm-hmm. And let us just decided by research if there's something in it or not, but not by what we think about it, what we think what's possible, and what we think it is not possible.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting. This became then the main newspaper in Iceland, Morgunblaðið. Later they published our writings one against the other.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and it was widely read. My studies were primarily empirical studies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but of course some of them are just about people's experiences, but still when you have people's experience, you can, if you have a large number of cases, you can see what are the features of the cases, what is prominent in these cases, and so on. And then even when people are talking about their experiences, there is usually something in it you can try to verify.
Mm-hmm.
Like in my studies of encounters with the dead, when people would have some kind of a vision or see someone who was deceased, then I would almost ask them, what was the name of that person? And sometimes, usually they knew, sometimes they didn't. And then I would ask them, how old was this person at that time, or when they died, and so on. I would ask about it, and then when I had this, I would check, because at the university we had a genealogical record of the population in Iceland in the last 150 years, with names, dates of birth, dates of death, and also cause of death. And I got access to that. So I will always check, did this person really exist? Are they telling a true experience in that way? And then I would also find out, did they seem to know when that person had died? And then I would also check, is it correct what they said about how the person died? Mm-hmm. And so I checked these things. There are some of the things you can usually check. And then, of course, as I think I've already told you, a fairly unusually large percentage of the people who were perceived, they had died violently. They had died by accident or some other violent means. I think there was about 30% who had died violently, whereas in the population in Iceland as a whole, only about 5 or 6% die violently. So that's a huge difference. So those who have died violently, they are 4 times as likely to appear to people as those who have died by disease. Then it was also prominent how often these cases occur at the time someone dies. About every 7th case is about someone having an experience of someone at the time he or she dies, without that person knowing that the dying person is in danger of dying. And that's very common. And I think if you would do that survey in Finland, you will find the same thing. Because this finding was also done in Britain in a big survey or big collection of cases that was collected in the 1880s. So it's still the same in Iceland, in a different country. And so about every 7th case concerned experience of someone at the time he dies.
We have reported also those things that when somebody is dying, there might be like some clock is stopping or some other physical issues, or sometimes people have experienced that person coming to them and it disappears and then it has died somewhere else, that they have some kind of visions or how to put it.
Yes, that's well known. I didn't particularly survey that about stopping clocks, but that is well known to have occurred. There are many cases of that kind. And
According to those years, what you have been searching and investigate those phenomena, have you personally experienced and witnessed something what you still cannot?
Encounters with the dead?
Yeah, example.
Yeah. Well, when I was a student, I was 1.5 year a student in Copenhagen.
Mm-hmm.
And I rented a room from an old lady. And she had an apartment and she rented one room. And then, before I was going to bed, I would often see, like with my inner eye, that someone opened the door, an elderly man, he opened the door and looked at me. And I could see him fairly clearly just in my sort of inner imagination.
Yeah.
And that happened a few times. He came there and looked at me sort of observant. But I didn't do anything about it, and it stopped. But if this had happened to me now, or a few years later, I would have asked the old landlady maybe if I could see a picture of her husband. She might have been a widow. Or I would have liked to know who lived in that room before, because perhaps that person either was her husband or had lived there before. But I didn't do it. I was not so research-minded at that time.
Have you heard about cases that those dead people has had some physical reaction in physical realm?
Yes, the physical reaction in the same room.
Yes, example.
Yes. Well, I remember, like in India, I did most of the interviews in India. I remember one case, someone was dying, and then there was a glass, just a glass for water, standing nearby. And at the time he died, the glass exploded.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Then I can tell you, which is of course different, about one experience I had of these physical effects. One time later, when I was in Copenhagen, I rented a room, and it was an apartment on the first floor, and there were 2 rooms towards the street, and there was 1 room towards the yard, and then there was a kitchen, and there was a little corridor in between these 2. And during the day, there were ladies, 2 ladies, working in this room towards the street. They were mending clothes. There was, yeah. And then at 6 o'clock or so, they would go home, and I would never see them in the evening, and I would never see them at weekends. But then one time in the evening, I hear someone in the kitchen that was next to my room. And there are people, like 2 people talking or something, and they are doing something and so on. So I thought the ladies must have come back. So I opened the door, and there's no light there, and then everything is dead silent. And so I was a bit surprised, because it was, of course, it was dark in the evening, like it is in Copenhagen. And then later in the evening, I hear the same thing. There is something going on in the kitchen. Some people talking, and like they were doing something with the dishes and so on, like working in the kitchen. So I thought, now I will be careful. And listen carefully to them. No question. There were people there, and they were talking, and they were doing something. And then I went to the door and opened it suddenly, and no light, and everything became dead silent.
So
strange. Yeah. Well, but that's not, this was not the end of it. then later in the night, I go to bed. And I had a bicycle like anyone else in Copenhagen, and I had a lamp with it, which I took inside always. And then I would sleep on a sofa. And then there was a chair next to the sofa, and at least on this occasion, I assume, I had put the lamp there. And then when I had just fallen asleep, I suddenly is blinded in my eyes. So completely blinded, there was a strong light. So I wake up, and then I noticed that the lamp that I had on my bicycle, it had been lit, and it shone directly into my eyes. But I thought it was very odd that it would, I wasn't not even sure I had put the light there, and that it would shine exactly in that direction, and that it would be lit on suddenly. I had never noticed before that it had been lit when it was in my room. And this happened all in the same evening. It was very odd.
And fascinating.
Yes, fascinating. So then I remember I was telling the story to someone, and then I was almost puzzled by this light in my eyes. And then he came up with an explanation. You disturbed them, namely those who were in the kitchen, by opening the door so everything finished. So they wanted to disturb me in my sleep.
Well, sounds actually logical explanation. But you thought that those people who was lifting those flashlights and so on, that they might be dead people.
Well,
or is there any other options or possibilities? Like,
well, they were not living people. If they were living people, they should have stayed in the kitchen. I could have seen them and spoken to them. But I assume these were people because I heard talking, and I heard they were like doing something, like washing up or something. So, and then when I opened the door, it all suddenly stopped.
Yes.
If these had been living people, they wouldn't have stopped. They would have been there. Yeah.
I just wondering that.
So either these are dead people, or these are some kind of image, so echoes from something happened in the past. But anyway, it is
some kind
there's
of
no normal
entity.
explanation to this. Yeah. So. Yeah, so I have had experience of this kind, yes.
So maybe it's also one big reason why you have kept researching those things, because you have witnessed it by your own eyes.
Yeah, I think it made me more ready to do it. Yes, yeah. Well, in my research, it's just led one thing to another. Yeah.
You thought about this medium who had a physical phenomenons. How about those kind of things when you have been researching? Have you seen also something?
No, I have not. Never seen any physical mediums. Are very rare or hardly exist today, and so I have no direct experience of that. But I studied the accounts written on Indreson very carefully. There were those who studied him were quite a few of them were academics, and they did it exceedingly carefully. And they would always hold both his hands and put their foot over his knee and so on, so that they would be sure where he is. And then they left behind protocols about the sittings, we would describe in detail what happened. Yes, and they published papers on it. So there are good records about the whole thing. And I put it all together and wrote that book on him. But then there was also one new thing that I could research. It was at one time with Indra the Sun, a person appeared in the seances. There was like a pillar of light, and in that pillar of light would appear a person. And he said he is Fabrikant Jensen, and he spoke Danish. And then he disappeared, and then he came later in the evening and says that there was a fire in Copenhagen. There was a fire in a factory in Copenhagen. And then he goes again, disappears, and then he comes like an hour later and says, now the fire has been brought under control. Well, then that sitting is over. But then several days later, he appears again. So they start to ask him who he is, and he says his name is Emil Jensen. And then he also said that he had been unmarried, ugift, and also he had no children, and he had brothers and sisters, and they are still living. Yes, so he said that. But those who studied Indra Indrason in the old days, they never tried to find out if any Emil Jensen, who was fabrikant, really had existed. So I went, once when I was going through Copenhagen, I visited some archives and libraries, and of course there are many, many Jensen, and there are some fabrikant Jensen, but there was only one fabrikant Jensen whose name was Emil Jensen. Yes, and then, by the way, when this fire happened, it was described by Indrede or by Jensen on the 24th of November, 1905. They recorded it down, and then they waited for the next ship to come from Copenhagen, because there was no telephone connection with abroad from Iceland, and there was no radio connection either. So they had to wait for the news to come, and then because they thought if there had been a fire in Copenhagen, it should be in Politiken. That was the main newspaper in Copenhagen. And then shortly before Christmas, there come the first ship, and they look on Politiken also, and they look it up. Yes, there was a fire in Copenhagen on the 24th of November, and the fire was in a factory. And this fire was in Store Kongensgade 63. And yes, and then it is stated also that there was a fire there, but the fire brigade brought it under control in about an hour. But then I thought it would be interesting to know if this Emil Jensen had existed, like I was saying before. Mm-hmm. So I asked, so I made inquiries. Yes, there had been one Emil Jensen, fabrikant. And then what surprised me most was that he had lived at Store Kongensgade 67. Okay. The fire was at 63. He had lived at 67. And his father, who had a shop, had his shops on Store Kongensgade 40. And this family and Emil Jensen had lived in Store Kongensgade or near Store Kongensgade practically all his life. Mm-hmm. So this was his area. This reminds one a bit about the description of Swedenborg, of the fire in Stockholm, because Swedenborg, he had just come from England and was in Göteborg, and his friends invited him for a dinner. And during that dinner, he tells them that a fire has broken out in Stockholm. And he was very concerned because his house was in Stockholm, in Södermalm. And then they wait for 2 days, till the first 2 or 3 days, till the first messenger comes on horse from Stockholm. And then it turns out there had been a major fire in Södermalm, and lots of houses got burned. Yes, but Swedenborg had told them in the end that the fire had stopped and his house was not burned. Mm-hmm. So that was verified. And these are very similar phenomena, except that Swedenborg was alive when he made that description, whereas Kos Jensen had passed away, and it happened in the mediumship of Indre Indridason. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Indre Indridason had really existed. Mm-hmm. Yes, and then Emil Jensen, he had existed, and then he made these different statements. He had been ugift. He had not been so old when he died. He had brothers and sisters that were alive and so on. So I made inquiries through the some records there, and I found that he died, and on his death certificate is written that he was unmarried, he had no children. Mm. And I also got the record from the Skifteret, from the where he divided his property, and that he had in fact 4 sisters and 2 brothers, and they were all alive when he died. So what statements he had made about himself on this seance, and that were written down as it occurred, they proved all correct.
Quite amazing.
Yes, it's really amazing. Yes. And there are many things like that, or not exactly like that, but comparable things in the mediumship of Indre Indridason, about whom I wrote the book, mm-hmm. Indre Indridason, the Icelandic physical medium.
Mm-hmm. If we go back for a moment, your own experience, what you had, it's can give a conclusion that dead people can affect the physical world, like lifting up this light.
Yeah. Well, it looks like it. Mm. It looks like it.
Have you had also some other reports from other people's experience about this thing when dead people influences the physical world?
I think I have, but I don't recall any case at the moment. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think some of the cases that we got, these 400 cases, there was something on the sort, but I don't remember individual cases.
Yeah, no. Okay. Have you had also some other kind of own experiences about paranormal beside of these dead people?
I will think about it.
If we thinking about those paranormal issues, what you have searched and experienced, how that has effect on your own worldwide and how you see world today? What this has been?
Well, I do not notice that my worldview has changed very much. Or it has changed so gradually I haven't noticed it. But well, there's no radical change at any particular time. No radical change. I think regarding the encounters with the dead and this deathbed vision and so on, we have indications that people survive death. Yes. And also from these studies of children who remember past life, we have some indication that they have lived before. So that is it. But then the question is, we are in our daily life confronted with the physical world, and we think the physical world is the only world. And then of course we have our mind, which seems to be quite different somehow. But we identify with the physical world, and that's the only world we know generally. But if people survive death and so on, then it is an indication that there exists another reality, another world. And so there is, so if this is true, there is not just one world, it's not a universe, but there must be another kind of reality. So there must be what sometimes now called a multiverse, universe, multiverse. So there must be more than one reality, but this other reality is some reality that we are very seldom aware of.
In moment of birth and death.
Yes, perhaps in particular, well, at the time of death, yes. And Kallisosis used to say, if you want to study the question about life after death, or if there is any life after death, then you should look at, examine what happens very early in life and at the end of life. And at the end of life, that were the deathbed visions. But then it turns out also that children, just when they start to speak, some of them, rarely, but some of them, they will talk about memories, that they remember things from a previous life. So that's it.
Have you heard about cases that kids, they use, in Finland we call that they have those imaginary friends when they are...
Well, there are quite a number of children who have imaginary friends, and I have made a study of them. One of my students, she found over 20 cases of children who have imaginary friends. But and these imaginary friends are very real to them, and they start to have them at an early age, but then later they disappear. Even if I remember correctly, in a similar time as when children who have remembered past life stop to remember them. But these imaginary playmates, they are a bit of a mystery. It has not been, you cannot test anything about them. They do not give their name, or yes, we tried to get a little further with the study of death of imaginary playmates. We didn't really get anything that would give us any firm information.
Do you find some similarities about those deathbed vision characters who are in coming to big person who is dying on, and also those imaginary friends what some kids might see in.
Well, I think that, of course, visions at the time of death, they see the deceased friends and relatives and spouses. But the imaginary playmates, they are not seeing anything that's a very different experience, and it's not related to dying. And although the children gave these imaginary playmates a name, they are rarely, or I don't know any case, where they are identified as someone who has lived before and has passed away. So they are really a mystery,
and I guess they remains as a mystery. Those.
Yeah, well, they have remained a mystery. Well, it's usually believed that they are just imaginary playmates. Some call them invisible playmates. But I have no explanations. Some also think that they sort of make them up so that they have companions. But these children who have imaginary playmates, they are also in families where there is more than one child. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was asking about this worldview, how it has developed and changed by those researchers. This is one thing what I'm usually asking from people from my interview, because I have seen that in almost every case those experiences what they have had has changed their worldview, and they have find out the world more wider perspective.
Yeah. Well, I think, as I told you before, I do not find any particular time when there was a drastic change in my worldview. I think it may have taken place, but very gradually. And this, what I was researching, there was never any sort of resistance on my behalf, like of the encounters with the dead, that or on the mediumship, or on the children who remember past lives. For me, this was primarily an empirical question, and I would investigate it as an empirical thing. And if I had any view about it, I certainly didn't have any strong views against it. I think I was more positive about it. And then and this of course had all been researched before, so I was not the first one to do it. And there was evidence from earlier studies. So I just took it easy and took it as it came. Yeah.
Well, that was a very nice and interesting interview. Thank you.
Make a survey of people's experience and beliefs here in Finland, like I did in Iceland in 1974 and 5.
Be ready to get confused. you